All right, so now we're going into modulation. What I'm going to do is I'm going to, actually I might just take this first phrase, copy this, go into a new block. All right, there we go. Okay, so in order for this to work, in order for modulation to work, we established an original key. In this instance, the original key was G. Now, the way modulation works is modulation, instead of just being a key change or a key shift, modulation essentially will take the same lines and it will augment their position either in the key signature, which means like let's say with this line right here. Instead of starting on the C where it's going, let me switch over to it. There we go. Instead of starting on here, we're still going to be in the same key, but if we shifted somewhere else in the key, we could go and use the same step pattern, but the forcing it to be inside of the key. So we couldn't just shift all these up and say it's modulation. We'd have to shift these up and still fall and stay at the same key. The other thing we could do that could be different is we could actually modulate half of it. Hey, bud. Oh, appreciate it. Free lunch. Thank you, Ron. You're the man. And we could modulate it so it almost feels like part of the lower section is actually in a different key, while the phrase up top still stays in the same key. So there's a couple ways we could do it. So like I'm going to do the modulation to the lower end and keep the high guy's melody the same for now, so we can darken it a little bit. And let's say we're going to go to this one. So I'm going to move. I'll have to loop this just so I can hear what's going on with it as I change this. Now notice I lowered it, but notice that part of it doesn't work because this half step doesn't exist in the key. So what I'm going to have to do is I'm going to have to take all those guys that are hitting this wrong note and shift them down so that they fit. Oh, this one too. All right, it's close. It's not all the way there. So let me see if I can get it. Let's try this one. Oh, gee. Same problem. F natural's not in the key, so I gotta. Let's listen to that together. Modulate it. Now what I could do is I could use half and half. Actually, you know what the problem is I think I might like it better if it was a leap. So again, keeping the same group. So you're seeing it's the same phrase patterns, we're just using different notes to modulate. I'm going to try this too. Nope, didn't like that one as much. Now the other thing we can do, I'm going to take this back to where it was. Actually, I'm going to have to delete it real quick. Duplicate it, so we're back to where we were. I'm going to mute this. I'll come back to it in the modulated form. Now I'm going to go into the bass line, because the bass line is establishing what chords we're using. And the chords that we're using currently are G. Let me open this one up. Somehow I lost communication. Hold on a second. Let me kick that back on and off. There we go. This is what it's doing. Right, pretty much this. So what I can do is I can make this darker by going into the relative minor. So I'm going to pretty much do the same thing. I'm just going to slide it down. So I'm going to lower it. It has to stay inside of the key. Let's try that. Oh, I'm sorry. I forgot I left the octave up there, didn't I? So, bum, 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 bum. I might be able to. Now notice I'm modulating these by just sliding them down a little bit. Right now I only have the two parts playing, this one and the viola. And what I might do is in the viola part, viola 1, kind of darken it by changing some of the notes. All I did was move that 1. Just to avoid that third interval moving to F. And then, of course, I could actually change the end of this and go. And if we open this up, notice we didn't have to modulate this viola 2 group for this one spot. What we might do for this one section where it changes, see if I can get it to work. Now the problem is these guys don't fit inside the key, so we have to change them. Now we're going to do on this one. Now, so you kind of follow, all I'm doing is I'm shifting tonally what's going on in those groups in order to I mean, they're still inside the key. The original key was G. All it required is an F sharp, so I'm just sitting inside of the key and I'm moving where they are in relation to the key. What I'm going to do in this set, this version of the modulation is actually shifting the key by just making the key minor. So I'm not modulating, I'm not saying we're going from G major to its relative minor, E minor, using the same key signature. Instead, I'm going to say we're starting in G major, and we're going to make it G minor by lowering. What do we lower in for the minor versus the major? We lower the third, the sixth, and the seventh note. So what that requires is, in order to go from G major to G minor, here's G major, F sharp, G. Instead, I'm going to lower the third. So here's 1, 2, and 3 was B. I'm going to lower that B, so now it's B flat. And I'm going to lower the 6, so there's 3, 4, 5. What was the 6th was E. Now it's got to be E flat. It's going to be a lowered 6th, and then I'm going to lower the 7th. 7th was F sharp. And I'm going to lower the 7th, so now it'll be F. So the key will now essentially be G minor, and it's only going to have a B flat and an E flat. So it'll be this now. Now, it's easy to do in the grid here because all we have to do is we have to make sure that any of the Fs that we had become, or F sharps now become F. Easy way to do that, just to go in. You're looking for anybody on F sharp. No one's on F sharp here, but we do have a B. So everybody who was on a B, so all the B's become B flats, all the E's become E flats, all the F sharps become F because we're just shifting that minor key. So I'm looking for anybody that's a B flat or an F. So what I'm going to do is in this modulation spot, I'm just going to lower us. And actually I'm going to resolve this because I actually changed this a little bit. Actually, I might not. Just leave it and see how that works out. I might leave it and see how it works out. I'm going to go to the other parts. Up top, I'm looking for anybody who's an F sharp. There's no F sharps here. Anybody who's an E. No E's. Anybody who's a B. No B's in this group. So that whole part can stay. In this next group, what do we have? We have B here. B is going to go to B flat. Oh yeah, that's an F. F can stay. D can stay. So that group's done. We're going to go to the last. Oh, we already did this one. We're going to the low end. In the low end, we have G. We have F. Because I already changed it technically. Let's see, I think we can make that work. Let's see. Oh, that's what changed too. So that's what it sounds like. There's only a couple pitch changes that actually change because there's only a couple notes that actually play anything different. The other alternative is to do the modulation so that, again, the key, instead of changing it from G major to G minor, we use the relative minor, which is E minor. Same key signature. The only difference is in order to make that work, we have to drop all these so that the melody starts on E. So we're doing that lowered. It's something that we did a second ago when we were dropping pitches here. But we're going to go to a lower third. Now, if we keep it major, we could keep it major, and right now it's in the E minor form. If we switched it to E major, we would change that in one note. There's only 1/3 in the melody line. And then it shifts back. Hear how it feels like it lifts? So like if we were to go, in that instance, I did, instead of doing the relative minor, I actually did the, actually we go back and change this. So that we keep that relative minor version. This one I changed I went down to the 6th, I kept it major. But if I was to hang out in this key for a while, and then switch back up and go back to the original key, oops, copy, actually I'll put it here. Paste. So it's gonna key change down to the 6th major, and I'm gonna hang out there for a second. Now it's gonna jump back up to the original key. Here it goes. It's like, oh, that's kind of refreshing, that switch. Does that make sense? So the reason why all that's so important is because I just showed you octave use, modulation, key signature changes, and variations of them, all on the same idea. Does that make sense? So we're using the same, all that essentially was a single sketch that was then put into parts, and essentially it's a melody with counter melody, and there was a harmony in there, and we used an octave pairing of a sort. And by rotating the variants of how they're being used, we end up with this whole conglomerate of variations, all from the same single idea. Does that make sense? So like when you're building your sketches, all of a sudden you have this huge palette after you've developed your, say, hey, I have a sketch here, I'm going to develop it into a 4-part. Now all of a sudden you have something to work with. I'm going to go back to song. And the fun part about this is I can actually, because I have this in the original format, I'm going to go into song. Let's see, I forget what my first verse was, actually. Let me see what it was. Oh, let me unmute all these. Oh, this is all a different idea. But again, we can kind of go. That sketch one was supposed to go along. What's in the sketch? Let's go back to octaves. That octave group went on pretty long. Key changes. And finally, modulation. So if we were to look at this as a one whole piece, it's going to shift around a little bit because I moved from one main idea to, so I was writing the melody versus counter melody parts. So the new idea, and this is the octave variations. Key changes. All right, now we're going into modulation. That was the relative minor modulation shift. This next one is the relative minor, but instead of letting it be minor, it's the sixth of a chord in a major form. All right, now the next thing we can do, once that's pretty much all in place, I mean, and it's not like you're not going to build a song like that, it's just these are your variations you can use. Let's go back and look at the modulation. One thing I want to point out here in this kind of final round is how we can then pick and choose key signature changes and modulation phrases as one, like small snippets, stack them up together and mix and match them. So like, if we were to look at the phrase, the whole phrase length is 4-measure phrase. And if I were to look up here at who's this, violin part, notice this section here is identical. This first bar is the same as the second bar. See it? And there's the note length is a little different here, but it's pretty much the exact same pitch, exact same rhythm. Bar 3 is different from 1 and 2, and bar 4 is different from 1 and 2. Notice that? And then if I go and look at the other set, so that one's different. In this set, same thing, kind of, although bar 1's different from bar 2. Bar 3 is pretty much the same as bar 1 rhythmically, except for there's an additional note that's not here. But it's pitch-wise, it's different. The end of the phrase is different. The reason why I'm mentioning this is because what I'm about to do is going to really turn the whole thing on its head. This section for the viola 2 part, bar 1, bar 2, and bar 3 are identical with one change on bar 4. Okay, see how the repetitive motion looks there? And then in the last option, this is the same thing as we'd seen before. The first one, because it's a duplicate and octave-wise, bar 1, bar 2 are identical, bar 3, bar 4 are different in pitch. The whole point of that is what I'm going to do, and I'd shown you this before, is if we go back to song mode, instead of writing these in full phrases, what I can do with this is I can go in and actually write these in very short segments. And the purpose of that is to kind of stall out and build a little more anticipation. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab the pencil tool. Or actually, you know what I'm going to do? Let's see, what we got? Modulation. I'm going to start, I think, on the key change ones. Oops, I don't know how that happened, but there we go. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the slicer tool, and I'm going to go pick out a couple of these phrases. And instead of being, and notice they're 4-bar phrases. If I cut it up here, right here, and I go play it, essentially it's just half the phrase. It's 2 bars of the phrase. So if I go find, so I'm going to go back and cut here and here. I mean, really, I could go through and cut here and here, here and here, here and here. What I'm doing is I'm cutting these up in 2-bar phrases, okay, for the purpose of being able to do different stuff with them. And I'm going to do the same thing in the modulation group in a second. Oops. Let's see who's who. Oops. I don't want those. Okay, so watch what happens here. All right, so watch how this works, okay? So notice, these are all key changes, and what I did is I took the first 2 bars of each phrase of the key change, and I just repeated it as, so just doing that bop, 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 and then change, key change. So watch, so. Walking down, the key change, it's all shifting down. Back up. And actually, I might do this one maybe. All right, now what I can do furthermore from here is if I want to be real drastic with it, I'm going to get rid of these. Actually, I'm going to get rid of these. I can do the same thing except in shorter sets. So instead of cutting these up in those kinds of situations like that, I'm going to zoom in on this a little tighter. And instead of doing this as a 2-bar, I'm going to do it bar by bar. Essentially 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. All right, so, oh, whoops, actually that was already set to bar, I just couldn't see it. And I'm going to delete every second half of the phrase. Gone, 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 gone. And then move these over. Now it's only going to be one measure of the phrase. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, right? And if we duped it, watch the stress on this, okay? So again, repetitive motion, watch how we're building with this. It's going to change each bar until the last bar, it's going to do it twice. And then it's going to feel like, oh, we're about to go back, right? And what we could do with that is if we did a volume swell, you know, right back into our original phrase. Let's see. Oh, it's in the. So if we took this back to our original phrase, key change right here. All right. So follow me on this. This is exactly how this works. We get through all this movement. And really, if we should find, there's one of these that sounds that the. Okay, I know what I'm going to do. Sorry, here's what I'm going to do in the key change group. All I need in this to really round it out and get back to home and do something really fun with this is to go back to the original phrase here. What I'm going to do is go back to the original phrase here and just move it so that actually I could do this. Is anybody? Oh, nobody got it. Oh, I know. All I'm going to do is add one more set, and I'll use that set as the closing set here. Excuse me. What I'm going to do is I just need that melody in this set to be nice and high in the octave. It'll close that out. It'll like really seal the deal here if we take that nice and high in the octave. And maybe give this one, this movement one, up an octave in the viola. Actually, we might do this. It might be too much. Actually, we lost it. Darn. Let me find that part. There it is. Sorry, I just want to put this part back in. Okay, there we go. Works for me. Yeah, and so I'm just going to land it home with this. Now, I could still do, the one thing I didn't do with this that I could still do that I never did with it is I could go in and write in the modulation version of the same thing. Hopefully that's the right spot. Nope. I'm going to set it up. Oh gosh, yeah, if I stacked on one. I think I did it in the wrong key, but you kind of see how by stacking up those points back to back, I actually am just kind of giving that repetitive motion to that phrase. We could build it up, back into the melody. I mean, you could imagine just adding some like percussive things to kind of fill it out would really land that home. You know what I mean? All of a sudden, putting in a beat because we're at a point where we're kind of flowing, and then all of a sudden we got that bop 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 bop. I mean, and you can really when you stack these, if you were really go into it and say, well, you know what, I like what's going on here in this, you know, and maybe add brass in the instrumentation at that section. Ba 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 ba. You know what I mean? You really get that to land. And that's it in a nutshell. So, you know, we're taking all those pieces that we build together, key changes, modulation, the actual development of the 4 parts, and we're just swapping around. I mean, it's a rotating thing. And today we're only working on 4 parts. Once we break this out to like a full orchestra, anybody can have this part, and we hand off these parts to different people, you know what I mean, or hand off different variations of the part. That's why the sketches are so important, because like you write an original sketch, and let's say your original sketch was ba ba da 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 da. That's the original sketch. Any modification of that sketch still essentially resembles your original idea. Again, copyrightable in that form. So if you decided you put it in the brass, and instead of having it be ba da 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 da, you have them go ba da 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 da. You know, it's still essentially some sort of alternative idea or variation of the original theme, which keeps us in that flow. Which essentially, before you know it, now all of a sudden you have a song, you know, a composition versus just your individual phrase packets. Make sense? Now, going back to the original idea, when you're building your sketches are going to be your melodic ideas, and you can still build sketches out of your rhythmic components. You might want to say, oh, I want a rhythm thing that kind of does this. But the way we were doing this is if your melody is elongated, then your supporting chords are shorter. If your melody is shorter, then your supporting chords are elongated, typically. Does that make sense? so that there's a clear difference who's who instead of them all being the same. So you're trying to avoid making a melody and chordal structure that supports it, counter melodies all be the same note length, right? Because then it gets really mundane. Even if I had taken this original part in the block series, this part right here, this part, and I made everything like this, you wouldn't be able to clearly figure out who the melody is. Someone's got to come in and soar above it, you know what I mean? Fluidly around that rhythm. So, you know, hopefully we can get into that 4-part writing series here. So